In this video, we are going to unveil a secret that has been hidden for centuries, buried deep within the pages of a book you know very well, a book that sits on millions of shelves around the world, a book that has shaped laws, governments, and the lives of billions of people. We're going to discover together what one brave man found when he dared to look at this book in a completely different way. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and he was just a simple lens grinder, a man who spent his days polishing glass so people could see the world more clearly. But one day he decided to use that same skill, that same careful attention, that same search for clarity to examine the most important book in the world. He looked at the Bible not with the eyes of blind obedience, not with the fear that had been taught to him since childhood, but with the eyes of pure reason. And what he discovered changed everything. He discovered who really wrote the Bible, and the answer, believe me, is not what they have told you in church every Sunday of your life. It is not what your parents taught you. It is not what the priests, the pastors, or the rabbis have been saying for 2,000 years. The final revelation, the one we will save for the perfect moment in this video, has the power to give you something you have been searching for perhaps your entire life. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from following rules out of fear. Not the peace that comes from hoping you have been good enough to avoid punishment. But the kind of peace that comes from finally understanding the truth, the kind of peace that sets you free. But I must give you a warning before we continue. This video is not for everyone. This is not for people who prefer the comfort of old answers, even if those answers do not make sense anymore. This is not for people who would rather stay in a familiar cage than step out into the open air of freedom. This journey is only for brave souls. It is only for people who, at the end of the road, would rather have a truth that liberates them, even if it hurts at first, than a lie that comforts them but keeps them in chains. If you are one of those souls, if you feel deep in your heart that the time has come to put down the heavy suitcase you have been carrying for so long, I want you to do something for me. Leave me a comment right now. Tell me from what corner of the world you are watching this video. Tell me you are ready to take this journey with me, because we are about to walk a path together that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Do not leave this video. Do not click away. What you are about to hear in the next few minutes could be the beginning of your true freedom. It could be the moment when everything finally starts to make sense. It could be the day you stop living in fear and start living in peace. The man we are about to talk about paid the highest price for discovering this truth. He lost his family. He lost his community. He lost everything. But he gained something far more valuable. He gained the truth. And today, I am going to share that truth with you. Imagine for a moment that you are a man living in the 17th century. You were born into a world where everything was certain. Everything had its place. Everything had its answer. You have been taught from the moment you could understand words that the Bible is the literal, direct, and infallible Word of God, not inspired by God, not influenced by God, but dictated by God. Every single word, every comma, every period, every letter was spoken by a divine entity directly into the ears of chosen prophets. This book is not just important. It is the foundation of absolutely everything. It is the basis of all law. It is the source of all morality. It is the only hope for salvation in the life after death. The Bible is not something you question. The Bible is not something you analyze. The Bible is something you obey. To doubt even a single word of this book is to doubt God Himself. And that, you have been told since childhood, is the worst sin a human being can possibly commit. It is the unforgivable sin. It is the sin that leads straight to eternal fire and damnation. Now imagine that your profession, your daily work, is polishing lenses. You spend your days in a quiet room with dust from ground glass floating in the air. You take pieces of raw glass that are cloudy and imperfect, and you carefully, patiently remove every imperfection, every tiny bubble, every distortion, until the glass becomes crystal clear, until people can look through it and see the world exactly as it truly is, with perfect clarity. This is your craft. This is your skill. Clarity, truth, seeing things as they really are, not as we wish them to be. And then one day something changes inside you. You decide to use that same skill, that same patience, that same relentless search for clarity, to look at the most important book in the world, not to worship it, not to memorize it, but to actually read it, to truly read it, to examine it the way you examine a piece of glass, to look for the imperfections, to search for the distortions, to ask the questions nobody else dares to ask. That is exactly what Baruch Spinoza did. And for doing this, the world he knew completely destroyed him. You may have heard a little bit about him before. You may know that he was excommunicated. You may know that his own Jewish community in Amsterdam, the community that had welcomed his family when they fled persecution in Portugal, turned against him with a fury that was absolutely terrifying. They pronounced upon him the cherem, which is the most severe curse in Jewish tradition. It is a curse that cuts a person off completely from their people, from their God, from their eternal soul. Listen to the actual words they spoke over him. Cursed be he by day, and cursed be he by night. Cursed be he when he lies down, and cursed be he when he rises up. Cursed be he when he goes out, and cursed be he when he comes in. May the Lord never forgive him. May the wrath and fury of the Lord burn against this man, and bring upon him all the curses written in the book of the law. They did not just excommunicate him, they erased him. His own family turned their backs on him as if he had never existed. His father had left him an inheritance, but his family made sure he would never receive a single coin. He lost his community, the only community he had ever known. He lost his place in the world. He lost his identity. He became a ghost, a non-person, someone who was not allowed to be spoken to, not allowed to be helped, not allowed to even be acknowledged if you passed him on the street. And why? Why did they do this to him? What terrible crime had he committed? He had killed no one. He had stolen nothing. He had hurt no one. His only crime was that he dared to think. He dared to use his mind. He dared to ask questions. But here is what almost nobody tells you. Here is the part of the story that gets left out. The reason his thinking was so dangerous, so threatening, so absolutely terrifying to the religious authorities was not because he was talking about abstract philosophy. He was not sitting in an ivory tower discussing concepts that had no connection to real life. No. Spinoza did something far more practical, far more concrete, and for his time far more explosive than that. He became a detective. He became a detective of history. He learned ancient Hebrew, the language the Old Testament was written in. He learned Greek, the language of the New Testament. He learned Latin, the language of scholarship. He immersed himself completely in the original texts, not in translations, but in the actual words written thousands of years ago. And then he applied the same ruthless logic, the same careful attention, the same refusal to accept imperfection that he used when polishing a lens. When you are making a perfect lens, if there is a bubble of air trapped in the glass, if there is any kind of distortion, the lens is worthless. It does not matter how small the flaw is. It does not matter if most people would not notice it. A lens is either perfect or it is useless. And to fix it, you have to understand exactly why that flaw is there. You have to understand what went wrong in the process. You cannot just ignore it and hope nobody notices. Spinoza took that same approach to the sacred text. If the Bible had distortions, if it had contradictions, if it had traces and clues that did not fit together, if it had elements that made no logical sense, he needed to know why. He needed to understand what had happened. And in that search, his lens of pure reason revealed something absolutely shocking, something that would shake the foundations of Western civilization, something that the religious institutions, both Jewish and Christian, had spent centuries building. all their power and wealth and control, on the necessity of hiding from ordinary people. The Bible had not been written by God, and it had not been written by the authors to whom it was attributed. Someone else wrote it. But before I reveal to you who the true author was that Spinoza discovered, you need to understand why the story they told you never made complete sense. You need to see the small cracks that he saw, the tiny inconsistencies, the logical impossibilities. Because once you notice them, once you truly see them, you will never be able to unsee them. They will always be there, staring back at you every time you open that book. Have you ever sat in church or read the Bible at home and felt a small pang of strangeness? A question that rises up in your mind and that you quickly push away because, after all, who are you to question? Who are you to doubt what millions of people have believed for thousands of years? That little voice of doubt that you have been taught to silence, that is actually the voice of your own reason trying to speak to you. That is your mind doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to seek truth and to recognize when something does not add up. You were taught that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These 5 books are considered the foundation of everything. The law of God delivered directly to Moses on Mount Sinai. Moses went up the mountain, spoke with God face to face in a way no other human ever had, and came down with not just the 10 Commandments carved in stone, but with the entire law, the entire history, the entire story written down exactly as God dictated it. This is what you were taught. This is what billions of people believe. It sounds solid, does it not? It sounds like a powerful story. One author, one clear message, one divine source speaking through one faithful servant. It sounds unshakable. But Spinoza, with his magnifying lens, with his trained eye that could spot the tiniest flaw in a piece of glass, began to read carefully. He read with attention. He read with the kind of focus that most people never bring to the Bible because they have been taught that reading it critically is sinful. He made his way through all 5 books. He read the stories of creation. He read about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He read about the slavery in Egypt and the dramatic escape through the Red Sea. He read all the laws about sacrifice and cleanliness and festivals. He read about the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And finally he reached the end of the last book, the book of Deuteronomy. He came to chapter 34, and he read something that made him stop completely, something that made him read the passage again and again and again. End of life and death, a program of choice, because what he read was logically impossible. Listen carefully to what the text actually says. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land. And the Lord said to him, This is the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there, and you shall not cross over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Spinoza stopped. He put down the text. He picked it up again. He read it once more, and a question formed in his mind, a question so simple, so obvious, so completely devastating, that once you hear it, you will wonder how anyone could have missed it for thousands of years. The question is this: how can a man write about his own death? Not just that he died, but where he was buried, that no one knows where his tomb is to this day, that the people mourned him for 30 days. There is even a small eulogy describing how strong and healthy he was at 120 years old, how his eyes were still sharp and his body still vigorous. This is not a prophecy, this is not Moses writing, and when I die, this is what will happen. This is written in the past tense. This is someone looking back at history, describing events that already happened, describing the death and burial of Moses, as if Moses is a figure from the distant past. Think about it this way. Imagine you find an autobiography on a bookshelf. You open it and start reading. The person tells you about their childhood, their struggles, their victories, their life story. And then you get to the final chapter. And in that final chapter, written in the same first-person voice, the author describes their own funeral. They describe where they were buried. They describe how many people came to mourn them. They describe how no one has been able to find their grave even though people have searched for it. They describe what they looked like in their coffin. You would immediately know that something is wrong. You would immediately understand that this is impossible. The author could not have written this. Someone else wrote it. Someone who lived after the author died. Someone who was looking back at the author's life from a future point in time. That is exactly what Spinoza realized. This was not written by Moses. This could not have been written by Moses. Someone else wrote it. Someone who lived much, much later. Someone who was looking back at Moses as a historical figure, as someone from the distant past, as a legendary leader whose burial place had already been lost to history. This was the first crack in the wall. This was the first loose thread in the sacred tapestry. And when Spinoza pulled on that thread, when he followed that question to its logical conclusion, the entire fabric began to unravel. Because if Moses did not write the end of Deuteronomy, then who did? And if someone else wrote that part, how much more did they write? How much of the entire 5 books was actually written by this later author? And most importantly, why? Why would someone do this? Why would they present their own writing as the ancient words of Moses? What were they trying to accomplish? These questions, these simple logical questions, were like a dam breaking. Once the first crack appeared, the water started pouring through. Spinoza did not stop there. He could not stop there. Once you see one crack in something you have been told is perfect, you start looking for more. It is like finding one lie in a story someone has told you. Suddenly you start questioning everything else they said. You start examining every detail. You start asking, what else is not true? What else have I been accepting without question? So Spinoza kept reading. He kept examining. He kept applying his lens of reason to every page, every chapter, every verse. And he found more problems. Many more. Each one by itself might seem small. Each one by itself might be explained away. But when you put them all together, when you see the pattern, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. These books were not written by the people claimed to have written them. They were not written in the time period they claimed to describe. They were written much, much later by people looking back at ancient history. Let me show you what he found. In the book of Genesis, there is a story about Abraham. Abraham's nephew Lot has been captured by enemy kings. Abraham gathers his men and chases after these enemies to rescue Lot. The text says that Abraham pursued them all the way to Dan. That is what the text says. Abraham chased them to Dan. Now, this seems like a simple geographical detail, just a place name, nothing important. But Spinoza knew his history. He had studied the historical records carefully, and he knew something that most people reading the Bible do not know. The place called Dan did not have that name in Abraham's time. It was not called Dan until hundreds of years later, when the tribe of Dan conquered that area and renamed it after themselves. This is recorded in the Bible itself, in the book of Judges. Before that conquest, the place was called Laish. So how could the author of Genesis, supposedly writing in the time of Abraham or shortly after, refer to a place by a name it would not have for several more centuries? Think about it this way. Imagine you are reading a history book about the Roman Empire. You are reading about Julius Caesar and his military campaigns. And the author writes, Caesar marched his legions north and conquered the territory that would later become New York City. you would immediately know something is wrong. New York did not exist in Caesar's time. That name did not exist. That city did not exist. If an author uses that name while supposedly describing events from Caesar's time, it means the author is writing from a much later period, from a time when New York does exist, and accidentally let that future knowledge slip into their narrative. It is an anachronism. It is a fingerprint left by time. It is proof that the person writing lived long after the events they are describing. That is exactly what the mention of Dan is. It is a fingerprint. It is proof that whoever wrote Genesis was writing from a time when Dan already existed as a place name, which means they were writing hundreds of years after Abraham lived. This is not something Moses could have written. Moses, according to the Bible's own chronology, lived before the conquest of Dan. He died before the Israelites even entered the Promised Land. He could not have known that place would one day be called Dan. But the real author, writing centuries later, knew, and he accidentally revealed himself. Spinoza found more examples like this. He found passages in Genesis that talk about the kings who would one day rule over Israel. But here is the problem. These passages exist in a book that supposedly was written centuries before Israel ever had a king. It is like finding a prophecy that is just a little too specific, a little too detailed, a little too accurate. When you find a prophecy that describes the future with perfect accuracy, down to specific names and dates and details, the simplest explanation is not that someone had magical knowledge of the future. The simplest explanation is that the prophecy was written after the events already happened. It is not a prediction. It is history dressed up as prediction. And that is exactly what Spinoza found in these passages. They were not Moses predicting the future. They were later authors describing the past, but trying to make it look like ancient prophecy. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery Spinoza made was about the different names used for God. This is something that translators often try to hide or smooth over in modern Bibles, but in the original Hebrew text, it is impossible to miss. Sometimes the text calls God Elohim, sometimes it calls God Yahweh, and this is not random. It is not just variety for the sake of variety. There are long passages, entire stories, where only one name is used. And when you pay attention to which name is being used, you start to notice something remarkable. The passages that use Elohim have a certain style of writing. They have certain concerns. They have a certain way of describing God. And the passages that use Yahweh have a completely different style, different vocabulary, different concerns, different theology. Let me give you a specific example. In Genesis chapter 1, you have the first creation story. God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the seventh. This story uses the name Elohim. And the God in this story is cosmic. He is distant. He is orderly. He speaks and things come into existence. Let there be light, and there is light. He is not emotional. He is not personal. He is more like a divine architect, carefully constructing the universe according to a perfect plan. But then, in Genesis chapter 2, you have a second creation story, and this story uses the name Yahweh Elohim, and suddenly everything is different. The order of creation is different. The style of writing is different. And, most importantly, God himself is different. In this version, Yahweh is personal. He is almost human. He gets down into the dirt and molds man with his own hands, like a potter working with clay. He walks in the garden in the cool of the evening. He asks Adam questions as if he does not already know the answers. He is emotional, intimate, present. These are not two different translations of the same story. These are two completely different stories from two completely different authors with two completely different ideas about who God is. And Spinoza realized that someone, at some point in history, had taken these two stories and placed them side by side. Someone had collected multiple documents, multiple traditions, multiple versions of the ancient stories, and woven them together into a single narrative. but they did not quite match. The seams were showing. The different voices were still distinct if you knew how to listen for them. This is when Spinoza had his crucial realization. He was not reading a book. He was reading a library. He was reading a collection of different documents, written by different people in different centuries, with different agendas and different understandings of God. These texts had been oral traditions passed down for generations. They had been songs and poems and laws and histories and myths, and at some point, someone had gathered them all together. Someone had edited them. Someone had arranged them. Someone had tried to make them look like one continuous narrative from one author. But the evidence was still there if you looked closely enough. The fingerprints were still visible. The different voices could still be heard. Now the question was no longer whether Moses wrote the Pentateuch. The answer to that question was clearly no, he did not. He could not have. The new question, the truly dangerous question, was this: if Moses did not write it, then who did? Who was the person or people who collected all these different sources and put them together? When did they do it? And most importantly, why? Why did they work so hard to present this collection of human texts as the work of one ancient author receiving direct divine revelation? What did they have to gain? The answer to that question is where the real power lies, and it is where the real danger lies. Now we come to the moment you have been waiting for, the revelation, the answer to the question that has been building throughout this entire journey. If Moses did not write the first 5 books of the Bible, then who did? Spinoza followed the evidence like a detective following clues. He looked at the historical record. He examined the timeline. He studied the political situation of ancient Israel. And he came to a conclusion that was both shocking and, once you understand the context, completely logical. But before I tell you who the author was, you need to understand something crucial. You need to understand why this happened. Because the why is just as important as the who. The answer, my friend, has everything to do with power, control, and fear. Think about this for a moment. If a book is just a collection of human texts, you can debate it, you can question it, you can interpret it different ways. You can say, well, this author who lived in the 7th century before Christ had this particular perspective because of what was happening in his time. But this other author from the 5th century had a different perspective because his situation was different. You can contextualize it. You can understand it as a human document full of human wisdom and human mistakes and human agendas. It becomes something you can analyze and discuss and even disagree with. But if that same book is presented as the direct, literal, unchangeable Word of God, then everything changes. Suddenly you cannot question it. You cannot debate it. You cannot disagree with it. To question the book is to question God himself. And whoever controls the interpretation of that book, whoever has the authority to tell people what God meant when he said this or that person has absolute power. Power over how people think, power over how they behave, power over their laws, their morals, their fears, their hopes, their entire lives. That is exactly what happened with the Bible. And to understand it, we need to go back in history to one of the darkest periods in the story of the Jewish people. The year is 586 before Christ. The Babylonian Empire, the most powerful military force in the world, has just conquered Jerusalem. They have destroyed the temple, the most sacred place in Jewish religion, the only place where sacrifices to God could be offered. They have killed many of the people, and the rest, especially the educated, the priests, the scribes, the leaders, they have dragged away into exile in Babylon. Imagine what this meant. The Jewish people had believed that God had given them this land. They believed that as long as they followed his laws, they would be protected. The temple was the physical place where God dwelt among them, and now it was all gone. The city was destroyed. The temple was rubble. The people were scattered across a foreign empire, hundreds of miles from home. For 70 years they lived in exile. For 70 years an entire generation grew up in Babylon, never seeing Jerusalem. never offering sacrifice at the temple, never living in the promised land. And during those 70 years, something terrifying started to happen. The Jewish identity began to fade. The stories that grandparents told their grandchildren, the old traditions, the ancient laws, the songs, the festivals, they were starting to be forgotten. Different groups had different versions of the same stories. Different families remembered different laws. There was no central authority. There was no temple. There was no kingdom. There was a very real danger that within another generation or two, the Jewish people would simply disappear. They would be absorbed into Babylonian culture and vanish from history like so many other conquered peoples. They needed something to hold them together. They desperately needed something that could preserve their identity, even without a land, even without a temple, even scattered across foreign empires. They needed a text. They needed a book. They needed laws written down that everyone could agree on, stories that everyone would tell the same way, an identity that could survive in written form even if everything else was lost. And this is where our author enters the story. His name was Ezra, Ezra the scribe. And he was not just any scribe. According to the Bible's own account in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, he was described as a scribe skilled in the law of Moses. He was a priest. He was a leader. And he had a mission. Around the year 458 before Christ, after the Persian Empire had conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return home, Ezra came back to Jerusalem. And he came back with something in his hands. He came back carrying what he called the Book of the Law of Moses. In the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, we have an absolutely crucial scene. Ezra gathers all the people together in a public square. Men, women, and children, everyone who can understand. And he reads to them from this book from early morning until midday. And the text tells us something remarkable. It tells us that the people wept when they heard it. They were overwhelmed. They were emotional. They had never heard these laws before. This was new to them. Stop and think about that. If Moses had really written these laws more than 800 years earlier, if these laws had really been passed down carefully from generation to generation as the most sacred possession of the Jewish people, why would the people be hearing them for the first time? Why would they weep as if this was a shocking revelation? The most logical explanation, the explanation that Spinoza arrived at, is that Ezra did not just read an ancient book. He compiled it. He edited it. He may have even written significant portions of it himself. He took the oral traditions that different groups remembered. He took ancient fragments of laws that various families had preserved. He took stories about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that existed in multiple versions. He took the history of the kingdom that the older generation remembered. He took all of these different sources from different time periods with different perspectives, and he wove them together into a single unified narrative. And here is the crucial part. He presented this collection as if it had all come from one source, from Moses, from Mount Sinai, from God himself. He did not say, "These are the traditions our ancestors remembered, and I have collected them for us." He said, "This is the law that God gave to Moses." Why? Because he understood something about human nature and about power. He understood that if he said, "I wrote this," people could argue with him. People could say, "Well, that is just your opinion, Ezra. I remember the story differently. My grandfather told it another way." But if he said, "God wrote this through Moses 800 years ago," then there could be no argument. This was not Ezra's opinion. This was not up for debate. This was the eternal, unchangeable will of the Almighty. Ezra was not stupid. He was not evil. In many ways, he was trying to save his people. He was trying to give them something that would hold them together, something that would preserve their identity for future generations. And he succeeded. The text he created became the foundation of Judaism and later Christianity and later Islam. Billions of people across thousands of years have organized their entire lives around the book that Ezra compiled. But here is what Spinoza realized. Just because Ezra's project was successful, just because it achieved its goal of preserving Jewish identity, just because it has influenced human civilization in profound ways, does not mean we have to pretend it is something it is not. We do not have to keep believing the story that it was dictated by God to Moses. We can acknowledge what it actually is: a human creation, a brilliant, influential, powerful human creation, but a human creation nonetheless. This is what Spinoza discovered, and this is what made him so dangerous. He pulled back the curtain. He showed that the emperor had no clothes. He demonstrated that the Bible, this book that had been used to control millions of people, to justify wars, to establish hierarchies, to create guilt, to promise salvation, to threaten damnation, this book was not what they said it was. It was not the direct word of God. It was a collection of human documents edited together by a clever scribe for political and religious purposes, 1400 years after the events it claimed to describe. The power of the religious institutions was built on the claim that they alone could interpret God's eternal word. But if there is no eternal word, if there is just a human book, then that power evaporates. The priests and rabbis and pastors become just teachers, just scholars, just people with opinions. No more and no less. And you, the ordinary person, you do not need them to reach God. You do not need them to tell you what to believe. You do not need them to forgive your sins or grant you salvation. You can think for yourself. You can use your own reason. You can find your own path. And that realization is what they could never allow. That is why they destroyed Spinoza. That is why they tried to bury his ideas. Because once people understand this truth, the whole system of control collapses. And now you understand it too? Now you understand why they excommunicated Spinoza. Now you understand why the church called him the most dangerous man in Europe. Now you understand why both Jewish and Christian authorities wanted his books burned and his name forgotten. It was not because he was attacking God. It was not because he was promoting immorality. It was not because he was leading people into sin. It was because he was threatening the very foundation of their power. He was showing people that they did not need the institution to reach God. He was showing them that the guilt, the fear, the endless rules, the threats of eternal punishment, all of it was built on a lie. Not a lie in the sense that someone intentionally wanted to deceive, but a lie in the sense that the story they told about the Bible's origins was simply not true. Think about what this means for the religious institutions. For 2,000 years, priests, rabbis, pastors, bishops, popes, they have all claimed to be intermediaries between you and God. They have claimed to have special access to divine truth. They have said, you cannot understand the Bible on your own. You need us to interpret it for you. You cannot reach God directly. You need us to carry your prayers to Him. You cannot know if you are saved. Only we can tell you through our rituals and our sacraments. You are born broken, stained with sin from the moment you take your first breath, and only we have the power to make you clean. Only through our institution can you hope to avoid the fires of hell. That has been the message for centuries. Submit, obey, do not question, trust us, because we speak for God. But if the Bible is a human document, if it was compiled and edited by a man named Ezra for specific political and religious purposes, if it contains contradictions and anachronisms and multiple perspectives because it is a library of human texts rather than a single divine message, then everything changes. Then the priests are not intermediaries. They are just teachers, they are just scholars, they are just human beings with opinions, no more valid than your own opinion. They do not have special access to God. They cannot tell you what God wants because they do not know any better than you do. The entire hierarchy collapses like a house of cards, and with it collapses their power, their authority, their ability to control how you think, how you vote, how you raise your children, how you spend your money, how you live your entire life. The church understood this immediately. They understood that if Spinoza's ideas spread, if ordinary people started reading the Bible the way he did, with reason instead of blind faith, with questions instead of automatic acceptance, the whole system would fall apart. People would stop paying tithes because why should they give money to an institution that has no special connection to God? People would stop confessing their sins to priests because why do they need a human intermediary when they can speak to God directly themselves? People would stop attending services out of fear because they would realize that the fear was manufactured, that the threat of hell was a tool of control, not a divine truth. The institution would lose its income, it would lose its influence, it would lose its power over the lives and minds of millions. And it would become just another human organization, no more sacred than a social club or a political party. And perhaps the most threatening part of Spinoza's discovery was what it meant for guilt. The church for centuries has run on guilt. It has told you that you are fundamentally broken, that you are born in sin, that your natural desires are evil, that your thoughts are impure, that you are constantly falling short of God's perfect standard, and that this gap between what you are and what God demands creates a debt that you can never pay on your own. You need salvation, you need grace, you need the church to mediate for you. Every Sunday you sit in the pew and you are reminded of your inadequacy. You are reminded that without the institution you are lost, you are damned, you are nothing. But here is what Spinoza showed. If the Bible was written by men with political agendas, if the laws were created to unify a scattered people rather than handed down by a cosmic judge, if the entire framework of sin and salvation was constructed by human beings for human purposes, then the guilt was never real. You were never broken, you were never born stained, you were never inadequate in the eyes of a cosmic authority. The guilt was put on you. It was loaded onto your shoulders like a heavy suitcase that you have been carrying for decades. And the people who put it there, they convinced you that you were the one who deserved to carry it. They convinced you that the weight was your fault. They convinced you that only they could take it off, but only if you obeyed them, only if you paid them, only if you submitted to their authority. Imagine that suitcase now. Imagine that heavy burden you have carried on your back for 40, 50, 60 years. The suitcase of guilt, the suitcase of I am not good enough, the suitcase of I am afraid of the judgment, the suitcase of I have to earn God's love, the suitcase of I might go to hell if I question too much. Now imagine realizing something profound. You have been holding the handle this entire time. You are the one carrying it, not because you have to, not because God demands it, not because you are broken, but because someone convinced you that you are supposed to carry it. Someone told you it was yours. Someone made you believe that. Without the weight, without the guilt, without the fear, you would be lost. But you can put it down right now, this very moment. You can set that suitcase on the ground and walk away from it, not because you are rebelling, not because you have become a bad person, not because you are turning your back on the divine, but because you have understood the truth. Because you have seen it with the clarity of a freshly polished lens, the same kind of lens that Spinoza spent his life making. The guilt was never yours. It was placed on you by human institutions that needed you to feel guilty so they could offer you the cure. The fear is not a message from God. It is a shadow cast by men who benefit when you are afraid. And the moment you understand this, truly understand it, the burden lifts, the weight disappears, and you realize that you have been free all along. You just did not know it. So if the old understanding of God, the one taught by the institutions, is based on a book that was created by humans for political purposes, does that mean there is no God? Does that mean the universe is meaningless? Does that mean we are alone in a cold, empty cosmos with no purpose and no hope? That is what the church wants you to believe will happen if you question their teachings. They want you to think that without them, without their book, without their rituals, you will fall into despair and darkness. But Spinoza discovered something completely different. He discovered that letting go of the institutional God, the God of fear and guilt and control, opens the door to something far more beautiful, far more true, and far more worthy of the word divine. I want you to ask yourself a question right now. Ask it with complete honesty. Look at yourself. You are over 60 years old. You have lived a full life. You have known pain and joy. You have experienced loss and love. You have raised children or watched them grow. You have seen people die and seen new life born. You have made mistakes and learned from them. You have accumulated wisdom that only comes from decades of real experience in the real world. Now, with all that wisdom, with all that life experience, answer this question. Which seems more divine to you? Which one truly deserves to be called God? Is it a God who demands blind obedience to an ancient book written by men? A God who threatens you with eternal torture if you do not believe exactly the right doctrines? A God who watches your every thought and judges you for being human? A God who says that you are born guilty, that you deserve punishment, that you need to grovel and beg for forgiveness? A God who divides humanity into the saved and the damned, the chosen and the rejected? A God who seems petty, jealous, angry, vengeful, more like a tyrannical human king than a cosmic intelligence? A God who created you with desires and then punishes you for having them? A God who gave you a mind capable of reason and then commands you not to use it? Or is it a God who is the intelligence itself that runs through the entire universe? A God who is not separate from nature, but is nature. A God who manifests in the beauty of a sunset that takes your breath away. A God you feel in the overwhelming love you have for your grandchild when they laugh. A God who is present in the precise mathematics that governs the stars. A God who gave you the capacity to think, to reason, to question, to discover, to love, specifically so that you could find your own path to understanding and peace. A God who does not demand submission, but invites exploration. A God who is not found in fear, but in wonder. Which of these two versions of God resonates with the wisdom you have accumulated in your long life? Spinoza chose the second one, and for that choice, he paid the highest price that his society could impose. He was excommunicated, he was cursed, he was cut off from his family and his community. He lived in poverty and solitude. He died young, at only 44 years old, his lungs destroyed by the glass dust from polishing lenses. He died officially labeled as a heretic, as an enemy of God, as someone condemned to eternal damnation. But here is what they could not take from him. They could not take the peace he found. They could not take the freedom he discovered. They could not take the profound sense of connection to the universe that he experienced through understanding rather than through fear. Spinoza developed a way of thinking about God that was radical for his time and is still radical today. He said that God and nature are the same thing, not that nature is a creation of God, but that God is nature. The divine is not separate from the universe, sitting above it, judging it, intervening in it from outside. The divine is the universe itself. It is the laws of physics. It is the force that makes flowers grow and planets orbit. It is the intelligence that organizes atoms into molecules and molecules into living cells. It is the consciousness that emerges when those cells form a brain complex enough to reflect on its own existence. God, in Spinoza's understanding, is not a person. God is the totality of everything that exists and the patterns by which it exists. This might sound cold or abstract at first, but Spinoza found it to be the most profound spiritual truth imaginable. Because if God is nature, if God is the universe, if God is the very fabric of reality, then to understand the universe is to understand God. To study nature is to study the divine. To use your reason, your intelligence, your capacity for logic and observation is to engage in the highest form of worship. Science is not the enemy of spirituality. Science is spirituality. Knowledge is not a threat to faith. Knowledge is the path to authentic faith. And your mind, your wonderful, questioning, doubting, reasoning mind, is not a dangerous tool that might lead you astray. It is the most sacred gift you possess. It is your direct connection to the divine. Spinoza called this the intellectual love of God, not an emotional love based on fear of punishment or hope for reward, but a love that comes from understanding, a love that comes from seeing how everything fits together, a love that comes from recognizing that you are not separate from the universe, but are a part of it. You are not a stranger in creation. You are creation looking at itself. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself. And that realization, that profound recognition of your place in the whole, brings a peace that no external authority can give you or take away from you. You too can find this peace. You do not have to stop believing in the divine. You do not have to become someone who thinks life is meaningless, or that there is nothing beyond the material world. You simply have to stop believing in the version of the divine that was designed to control you. You have to let go of the God who demands that you feel guilty for being human. You have to release the God who threatens you with torture for using your mind. You have to say goodbye to the God who needs priests and churches and rituals to be reached. And when you let that false God go, you will discover something amazing. The real God, the true divine, the actual intelligence and beauty of the universe was always there. You just could not see it because the institution was standing in the way. Questioning the religion of your parents is not betraying them. It is not disrespecting them. It is not turning your back on everything they taught you. It is an act of spiritual maturity. It is saying, I am grateful for the map you gave me. That map helped me when I was young and did not know the territory. But now I have walked these roads for 60 years. I have seen things the map did not show me. I have discovered that the territory is much larger and much more beautiful than the map indicated. And now I want to explore it for myself. I want to see what is really out there, not just what someone told me is out there. Your parents gave you what they had. They gave you what they were taught. They were doing their best. But you do not honor them by staying trapped in their limitations. You honor them by taking what they gave you and growing beyond it. And that is the truth that no one in the church will dare tell you, because if you discover it, you will no longer need them. They will lose their hold on you. They will lose their power over your thoughts, your choices, your life. Here is the truth they are hiding. Life is not an examination that you must pass to get into paradise. Life is not a test where you are constantly being graded and judged. Paradise is not a place you go to when you die if you have been good enough. Paradise is a state of peace that you can find right here, right now, in the life you already have. Paradise is understanding. Paradise is freedom from fear. Paradise is living in truth instead of living in the cage of manufactured guilt. The greatest revelation that Spinoza discovered, the one that cost him absolutely everything, was not just that Ezra compiled the Bible. That was important. That was the evidence, that was the proof that pulled back the curtain. But that was not the final revelation. The final revelation, the one I am giving you right now in this moment, is this. The greatest divine power that you possess is your own mind. It is your capacity to think, your capacity to reason, your capacity to question, your capacity to doubt, your capacity to observe the world and draw your own conclusions, your capacity to seek truth for yourself rather than accepting what you are told. That power, that ability, that gift of consciousness and reason is the most sacred thing about you. It is your direct line to the divine. It is what makes you human in the fullest sense of the word. For centuries, the religion of fear told you that this capacity was dangerous. They told you that doubt was a sin. They told you that questioning was rebellion. They told you that curiosity killed the cat. They wanted you to be submissive, not wise. They wanted you to be obedient, not free. They wanted you to be a follower who accepts without thinking, not a seeker who explores and discovers. They built their entire system on convincing you that your greatest gift was actually your greatest danger. They made you afraid of your own mind. They made you distrust your own reason. They made you feel guilty for asking the most natural questions a thinking being can ask. Why? How? What if? Is this really true? But Spinoza shows you the opposite path. Spinoza shows you that reason is not the enemy of faith. Reason is the path to authentic faith. Real faith is not believing without evidence. Real faith is not accepting things that make no sense because you are told to. Real faith is trusting in your ability to find truth through careful thought, honest observation, and fearless questioning. Real faith is having confidence that if you use your mind honestly and courageously, you will arrive at understanding. And that understanding, that hard-won knowledge that comes from your own investigation rather than from someone else's authority, that is what brings lasting peace. Not the fragile peace of someone who is afraid to ask questions, but the solid peace of someone who has looked honestly at reality and made their peace with what they found. So what do we do with the Bible now? Do we burn it? Do we throw it away? Do we declare that it has no value? No, absolutely not. That would be foolish. That would be throwing away centuries of human wisdom, human creativity, human struggle to understand the divine and the meaning of existence. We do something much more respectful and much more honest. We read it for what it actually is. We read it as a treasure of universal literature. We read it the way we read Homer's Odyssey, or Shakespeare's plays, or Cervantes' Don Quixote. We read it as a collection of human attempts to grapple with the biggest questions of life. We look for the wisdom it contains. We appreciate the beauty of its poetry. We recognize the eternal truths about love and loss and betrayal and redemption that it captures so powerfully. When we read the Sermon on the Mount, we can still marvel at its radical call to love your enemies and forgive those who hurt you. And we can choose to adopt that teaching not because a cosmic judge commands it, but because our own reason and our own heart tell us that it is the best way to live. It is the path that leads to peace, rather than to endless cycles of revenge and bitterness. When we read the Psalms, we can still find comfort in their honest expression of human anguish and human hope. We can relate to the person who wrote, my God, why have you forsaken me?" We have all felt that abandonment, that despair, that loneliness. And seeing those feelings expressed thousands of years ago reminds us that we are part of a long human story, that others have suffered as we suffer and found meaning as we seek meaning. When we read the story of Job, we can reflect deeply on the mystery of unjust suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does the universe allow innocent people to suffer while cruel people prosper? These questions do not have easy answers. The book of Job does not provide easy answers, but it shows us humans wrestling with these questions, and that wrestling is valuable even if it does not give us certainty. We liberate the Bible from being a rule book and transform it into a source of inspiration. We free it from being a master that demands obedience and allow it to become a wise counselor that offers perspective. That is the difference, and that difference is everything. That difference is freedom. Now, I know that this path can feel dizzying. I know it can be frightening. For decades, you have had a clear set of rules. Good and evil were defined for you. Right and wrong were written down in black and white. Your entire moral framework was provided by an external authority. And now, here I am, telling you that you are in a more open space, a space where your own conscience, your own reason, your own accumulated wisdom from 60+ years of living, that is your compass now. It is completely natural to feel some fear when you first realize this. Even Spinoza, in all his courage and brilliance, must have had moments of doubt in his lonely room. He must have wondered, what if I am wrong? What if everyone else is right and I am the one who is deceived? What if all those religious authorities are correct and there really is a hell waiting for those who question too much? But then he would look out the window. He would observe the natural world. He would see the perfect logic of the sun rising every morning. He would see the patterns in how rain falls and plants grow and seasons change. He would see life constantly finding a way forward, adapting, surviving, creating beauty out of chaos. He would use his mind, that divine tool, that sacred gift, and he would reason his way back to certainty. He would arrive at the same conclusion every single time. A God who is reason itself, a God who is love itself, a God who is the intelligence that runs through all of nature. Such a God could not possibly punish someone for using reason to seek truth. That would be a contradiction. That would be like the sun punishing you for seeking light. It would make no sense. It would mean God is imperfect, petty, jealous, insecure. It would mean God has the flaws of a human tyrant. And if God has those flaws, then God is not truly God. So here you are, at the last stage of your life, and you have an opportunity that many people never get. You have the opportunity to make peace, not with an angry God who was never real in the first place, but with yourself. You can forgive yourself for all those years of carrying unnecessary guilt. You did not know then what you know now. You were doing the best you could with the understanding you had. You can forgive yourself for not being perfect. Perfection was never required. You were always enough. You can give yourself permission to feel peace. You have earned it through decades of life, of struggle, of growth, of learning. You deserve to spend whatever time you have left free from fear, free from guilt, free from the weight of trying to please an institution that was never worthy of your devotion. The truth that Spinoza discovered, the truth that cost him his family, his community, his health, and ultimately his life, is a truth that can set you free right now. And here it is in its simplest, most direct form. You do not need anyone to save you because you were never condemned in the first place. Let that sink in for a moment. You were never broken. You were never stained. You were never inadequate. You were never standing on the edge of eternal damnation. All of that was a story that human beings created to control other human beings. It was effective. It was powerful. It shaped civilizations. But it was not true. And now that you know it was not true, you can finally stop carrying the burden. You do not need a priest or a pastor or any religious authority to open the gates of heaven for you. Because heaven is not a place you go to when you die. Heaven is not a reward you earn by following the correct rules and believing the correct doctrines. Heaven is a state of inner peace that you discover when you stop living in fear and start living in truth. Heaven is what happens when you let go of the guilt that was never yours. Heaven is the feeling of freedom that comes when you realize you are not being watched and judged every moment by a cosmic authority who is looking for reasons to punish you. Heaven is understanding that you are part of this vast, beautiful, mysterious universe, and that your existence has meaning simply because you are here, experiencing it, contributing to it, being part of the great unfolding story of life itself. The most important chapter of your life is not written in an ancient book. It is the chapter you are writing right now. It is the last chapter of your own personal story, and you have complete authority to write it however you choose. You do not have to write it based on fear. You do not have to write it based on trying to earn approval from an institution. You do not have to write it based on the desperate hope that if you are good enough, you will avoid punishment. You can write it based on reason. You can write it based on love. You can write it based on the wisdom you have gained from actually living for 6 or 7 decades on this earth. You can write it based on what your own heart tells you is true and good and beautiful. This is not rebellion. This is not turning your back on the divine. This is actually the opposite. This is finally turning toward the divine in its truest form. This is recognizing that the sacred is not locked away in buildings made of stone, guarded by men in robes who claim special access. The sacred is everywhere. It is in the morning light coming through your window. It is in the breath moving in and out of your lungs. It is in the miracle of your own consciousness. The fact that the universe has organized itself in such a way that a part of it can look at itself and ask, "What am I? Why am I here? What does this all mean? That capacity for wonder, for questioning, for seeking, that is the divine spark within you, and it does not need permission from any external authority to burn bright. Think about the shoes you have been wearing your entire life. They were given to you with love. Your parents, your teachers, your religious community, they gave you these shoes to protect you, to guide you, to help you walk safely through the world. And when you were young, those shoes fit. They served their purpose. But now, at your age, those shoes are too tight. They pinch. They cause pain with every step. They prevent you from walking comfortably. They keep you from running or dancing, or feeling the earth beneath your feet. Freeing yourself from fear-based religion is not walking barefoot into danger. It is not abandoning all guidance and wisdom. It is simply finding shoes that fit your adult feet. It is finding a way of understanding the world and the divine that matches who you have become after all these years of growth and experience. You are not the person you were at 20 or 30 or even 50. You have changed. You have learned. You have seen things. You have understood things. The religious framework that might have worked for you when you were younger may no longer serve you. And that is not a failure, that is not a betrayal, that is growth. That is what human beings are meant to do. We are meant to evolve in our understanding. We are meant to question what we were taught and test it against our experience. We are meant to keep what is valuable and release what no longer serves us. This is not disrespecting those who taught us. This is honoring the very gifts they gave us. The gift of curiosity, the gift of a searching mind, the gift of integrity that demands we live according to what we actually believe, rather than just going through the motions of what we were told to believe. So here is what I invite you to do. Not what I command you, not what I insist you must do, but what I invite you to consider. Take a moment after this video ends, sit quietly, and imagine that heavy suitcase you have been carrying, that burden of guilt and fear and never being quite good enough. Imagine setting it down, just for a moment, just to feel what it is like to stand without that weight. You might feel lighter, you might feel strange, you might feel a little afraid, because you have carried it for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to walk without it. But try it, see how it feels. And if it feels right, if it feels like relief, if it feels like coming home to yourself, then you have permission to leave that suitcase there. You do not have to pick it back up. You carried it long enough. Your shoulders can rest now. Your back can straighten. You can walk forward into whatever time you have left with your head up, your heart open, and your mind free. That is the gift Spinoza died to give you. That is the truth he paid everything to uncover. And now, it is yours. If these words have lit a light inside you, if they have validated something your soul has been whispering to you for years, if you feel that a heavy burden has begun to lift from your shoulders, then do not let this moment fade away like so many other moments of clarity that come and go in life. Do something with it. Let it become real. Let it become part of your story. And let it become part of someone else's story too. Give this video a like. I am not asking out of vanity or because I care about numbers on a screen. I am asking because that simple click tells the algorithm to show this message to other people like you, to other tired souls who have been carrying guilt that was never theirs, to other brave hearts who are ready to question what they have been told, to other seekers who deserve to hear that they can be free. Your like is not just for me. It is for them. It is for the person who will watch this video next week and finally understand why they have felt so conflicted about their faith. It is for the grandmother who has been afraid to admit her doubts. It is for the person who thought they were alone in their questions. Subscribe to this channel, because this conversation is not over. This is just the beginning. We will continue this journey together. We will keep polishing the lenses so we can see reality more clearly. We will keep asking the questions that others are afraid to ask. We will keep uncovering the truths that have been hidden from us, not necessarily with evil intent, but hidden nonetheless. There is so much more to explore, so many more assumptions to examine, so many more chains to break, and we will do it together, step by step, question by question, truth by truth. But the most important thing you can do right now, more important than a like or a subscription, is to leave a comment. Share your story. Answer this question. What belief, once you dared to question it, brought you the greatest sense of peace? Maybe it was the belief in hell. Maybe it was the belief that you were fundamentally sinful. Maybe it was the belief that God was angry with you. Maybe it was the belief that you had to earn love instead of simply accepting that you are worthy of love just by existing. Whatever it was, share it. Because your story, your journey, your courage, it has power. Your words could be the key that unlocks another person's cage. Your honesty could give someone else permission to be honest. Your bravery could inspire someone else to take their first step toward freedom. We are not alone in this. We are part of a long tradition of people who dared to think, who dared to question, who dared to seek truth, even when it was dangerous. Spinoza died young. He was only 44 years old when the lung disease that comes from breathing glass dust finally took him. He died in a small rented room. He died excommunicated from his people. He died officially condemned as a heretic and an enemy of God. The world he lived in had rejected him completely. But his ideas, the seeds he planted in the silence and solitude of his little room, those ideas survived. They spread, quietly at first, passed from one brave reader to another. They influenced the Enlightenment. They influenced the development of modern democracy and human rights and freedom of thought. They changed the world, even though the world tried to bury them. Because truth, like life itself, always finds a way. You cannot kill truth. You can suppress it for a time. You can punish those who speak it, but it always comes back. It always resurfaces. It always reaches the people who need to hear it. Today, that truth has reached you. Not as a new dogma that you must accept blindly. That would betray everything Spinoza stood for. That would make me just another authority figure telling you what to think. I am not giving you a new set of rules to follow. I am not giving you a new institution to join. I am giving you what Spinoza spent his life creating. A lens, a tool, a way of seeing. Use it to look for yourself. Use it to think for yourself. Use it to question everything, including what I have told you in this video. Because that is what true freedom is. Not replacing one authority with another, but learning to trust your own mind, your own reason, your own direct experience of reality. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. The greatest discovery is not written in an ancient book. It is not hidden in a church or a temple or a mosque. It is not guarded by priests or locked behind doctrines. The greatest discovery is right behind your own eyes. It is your capacity to see clearly, to think honestly, to love freely, to live authentically. The peace you have been searching for is not in heaven. It is not in the past. It is not in some future salvation. It is waiting patiently right now in your own heart. All you have to do is give yourself permission to feel it. The journey has not ended, the journey is just beginning, and you are not walking it alone. Until next time, my friend, be free, be brave, be at peace.